Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. This is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors. Glad to be back. And Kevin Gordon, co-host of the show, President of Capital Advisors, is here. Kevin, glad to have you with us, of course.
It's good. After a little months of a hiatus, we're back in legislatures in full form these days with budget hearings underway. We got a lot going on, and then we'll be on a regular basis from now on through the rest of this year. And it's good, John, to have you with us too. I know, Tim, you should give him the appropriate introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've watched the show before, you know John Harrington well. He's the CEO of Funds for Learning. It's the largest ERate consultant in the U.S. John also does a lot of wonderful advocacy work back in D.C. To support our schools with things like ERate and all that work that the FCC is doing. And we really appreciate all that work that you do back there in DC, John. But thank you so much for joining us today. We got a few things to chat with you about.
Thanks, Tim. It's good to be here with you. And Kevin, I always enjoy these conversations and really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it.
You bet.
Glad you're here. Well, let's get started. Kevin, there's big news this week about the politics behind masking. Why don't you fill us in on that, please? I know it's a big issue for everyone.
Yeah, well, the decision, did finally come down this week, sort of letting school districts know when the mask mandate actually no longer has force, and it's going to basically make it up to LEAs to sort of follow the guidance that's out there. And again, without that mandate in place as of the 11th, after the 11th. What I just wanted to kind of fill in the blanks on is a little of the politics behind this, is that I think everybody's probably well aware that all of our school folks were put into very difficult situations as leadership in the district, superintendents and governing boards. One of the big struggles was we obviously had our labor partners who have not been wild about seeing the mask mandate expire, having concerns and everything about, again, the part of our population that is the least vaccinated, which is amongst our kids. But then we've got parents groups in the communities. And one of the things that we really heard loud and clear from districts all across the state is that anger is not just on the fringe anymore. It's of rank and file parents and people in the community who've basically hung in there with school districts all along. And they just actually lost patience, and they lost it over a couple of reasons. One was the fact that other states sort of considered the blue states, their science seemed to validate no longer requiring masks, while we weren't seemingly following that. And then some of our elected officials sort of demonstrating not an adherence to the mask policy. And I know there are sort of reasons behind all of that, but the appearances, and in every single setting where parents were coming to boards, they were quoting and pointing to issues related to our political leaders not adhering to mask mandates. And they just basically said, why should we anymore? So under all of that, what we were trying to hold the lid on was the idea that we don't want to send a message to our kids that they can pick and choose which laws they like better than others to follow or not. If it's the law, we need to follow it. And we were basically telling the administration, we're hanging on here for dear life to keep this thing in place, but you got to show us a path out. And that's really what the governor did with the California Department of Public Health at the outside of this week, which is that now we see sort of the end to the mandate and what that path forward is, with guidance that goes with it, with regard to Cal OSHA, what the rules will be for us in schools up until, after the 11th. And then with school buses, there's been some supplemental guidance on that, but it's pretty clear now kind of where we're going to sit. But some of the things that contributed to accelerating, I think, where the administration ended up was sort of the dropping by CDC, the guidance they did nationally that pointed to both science and sort of the utility of continuing with a strict mask mandate that could actually be relaxed. And then when New York followed with basically not requiring a mask in public schools as of the first obviously put pressure on it. So all those political variables went into the mix, as well as obviously the view about science as advanced by Secretary Ghali at the state level, and we got to where we are. But I thought people would want to know a little bit about some of those other political variables went into it. And I'm just hopeful now that everybody can keep in a condition with regard to variants or anything else that might be thrown at us that makes more sense out of what we're doing with regard to masks. The next battle is going to be over vaccinations. We have Senator Pan's bill that's still making its way through the process. I'm not expecting, we were wondering whether or not the governor would call for any kind of change in his view about that legislation. There were no announcements at all relative to his view on the Pan bill. So it remains a regular piece of legislation that does not have an urgency clause in it. So that means this idea of a mandate in legislation that would apply to all of our students wouldn't presumably go into effect even if the bill passes until after January of 2023. So past that enrollment period this fall. So what we'll deal with before that, depending on what happens with the Pan bill, is the executive order by the governor that does call for vaccinations, but it contains a personal belief exemption. So there's always that out, but the Pan bill does not have that. So it's something that is one of the remaining controversial pieces out there that we're going to be dealing with. And there are a couple of other elements relative to vaccinations and mandates and these sorts of things that we'll keep you apprised of in the coming weeks. So that's kind of the mask story, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I know this is one of those issues that's just been getting in the way of our education leader friends just doing their job that they love. And really appreciate the updates there, Kevin, and hopefully some relief from folks as those mandates are lifted. So thanks for filling us in. And actually, Kevin, the folks who watch the show often know that we talk about the FCC and the work that they've done to try to help throughout the pandemic. Rosen Worcel, who's been named the chairwoman, she's done a lot of great work in that role. The FCC, however, has been split to Democrats, to Republicans. There's been an empty commissioner space, and filling that third space with a Democrat looks like it'd be a slam dunk, but it's been quite a bit harder than anyone thought. So Gigi Sohn is a Democratic nominee who would likely be a commissioner. However, she's met a lot of resistance from Republicans. This week, there was a vote that was split 14-14 that moved her through the Commerce Committee. There's several hurdles still to clear. And I think it's important to bring this up because the FCC actually has a huge impact on President Biden's administration's ability to deliver on some of the promises that he made, even on the State of the Union address this week. And that, of course, has implications on our school districts because Rosen Worcel is very school friendly. And this gridlock, let's just say, may not be helping us in schools. And John, I just know you've done tons of work with the FCC and looking at the FCC in the past. When they're split like this, maybe just talk about how you see this gridlock kind of slowing things down or maybe stifling the FCC.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tim, because historically the FCC was not part of segments called politics in K-12. It was much more of an independent agency, and whether it was Republican or a Democrat, it sort of moved the needle a little this way or that way, but it was much more less partisan. And what we've seen is a drift, and it's not just happened in the last year or so, but there's definitely been a drift towards a much more partisan take on the agency, which is a challenge. As you said, the FCC has a big impact on what schools do. And that's just simply because now the internet is such a huge part of education, whether that's internet in the school, the classroom, or now internet at home, making sure students are connected. So much of that intersects with the FCC. So now we've got this crazy intersection between schoolwork and school assignments and keeping kids connected and the politics of, okay, how many commissioners are there, at the FCC? And right now it's 2-2, which is limiting, there's no majority. So there's nothing controversial really is going through. And by the word controversial, I mean, just a big thing, not even necessarily controversial, but it's just, so we found a new place to have gridlock in Washington, D.C.
Well, it's one of the specialties. I think we've seen that strongly this year, and thanks for kind of clearing that up for us, John. And speaking of the FCC, I know you've been very vocal on social media about their efforts to regulate E-rate pricing. And for those of you who are not super familiar with E-rate, if you watch the show, you've heard us talk about it. It's one of the primary funding sources to have infrastructure, internet, wireless in your schools. So something that changes in E-rate has huge implications on your school district. So John, when they're talking about regulating E-rate pricing, how does that impact a school, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, they've actually proposed rules that would be sort of a takeover of the competitive bidding process when it comes to any internet access or wireless access points, everything that you rely on in your school to connect those students and teachers. They've kind of proposed taking that over and federalizing the purchasing of it. And that obviously has huge impacts because if you don't have control over what you're purchasing, then you don't have control over your internet. and that's a scary position to be for something that's now mission critical. If this was sort of secondary, like, okay. But I would imagine that, as a superintendent, for example, if that internet's down for 1/10 of a second, you've probably got board members, parents, teachers, that internet is down. So it's so important. It's so crucial to have it, and to sort of give control of those purchasing decisions to the federal government is, first of all, sort of frightening. And then really impractical. There is the idea that someone in Washington, D.C. sort of can be making the best choice for your school district in terms of which vendors you're working with, which services you're purchasing. It's not something that I think sets anyone up for success. And so, but right now, that's kind of the proposed rule that's out there. We're in the middle of a comment period right now where the FCC by law is required to receive comments, to hear from the community. And, we're just really encouraging individual schools to reach out both to the FCC and then as well, their representatives in Congress to make sure that they understand this is not a good idea because it could really have very detrimental impacts on the internet access in schools.
Hey, John, I'm curious whether or not you guys in your advocacy have done any sort of templated letters or sample letters that maybe we could use if people want them to communicate. People are busy, but this is important enough that I think there would be interest in wanting to get something onto their own district letterhead and get it out if they had a little bit of help. So I don't know if you've got any models of that. Let us can either append it to this broadcast as an attachment, or at the next broadcast, we'll make sure to announce that we have it.
Yeah, I will. And also one template that's already sort of out there right now is we have a petition on our website. We've already had a couple hundred school districts sign that. So they could really even just take that.
Great.
Copy, paste, edit, but use that. It basically just tells the FCC, we want to follow the rules, let us control the process. Let us manage the competitive bidding process and the selection process, because that's
great.
That's what, no one wants to outsource that decision to Washington, D.C.
No question about it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, great point, Kevin. And thank you, John, for your efforts there and clearing that up for us, and also offering the opportunity to join the other school districts in signing that petition. We will put the links to that underneath the YouTube video. And of course, they'll go out into the email that the Capital Advisors team sends out after this as well. So Kevin, just wanted to talk to you about raising the base in California, what that means for our school districts. Has some pretty big implications.
Yes. So one of the projects that we've been busy on just this week, and superintendents all over the state would have gotten this communication, is that Kirsten Vital, the superintendent of the Capistrano Unified School District, has been one of the leaders on this issue, as well as other efforts around the state. Our friends at Clovis Unified, with the support of school services and CSBA, and a lot of people are sort of gathering around this issue about base funding, and they've frankly been at it for a while. And we thought it would be great to sort of add another voice to this, which is that instead of a coalition where folks have to kind of contribute money, just a coalition of districts that actually think alike on this issue. And so one of the things that Kirsten wanted to do, and she captured in this idea of raise the base, I've got my little button here, the Raise the Base campaign, which is a really nice way of articulating that base funding in LCFF needs to go up, and it needs to go up by something greater than just the cost of living increase. When they give us a COLA, the cost of living adjustment, that's to pay for the increased cost of things that we already did last year. It doesn't do anything other than ensure that at the very least you're standing still, you're not moving backward, but it doesn't give you the resources to move forward. And in terms of local discretionary resources. So legislators and others are grumpy about the fact that, the governor's got a $16.1 billion budget on the table. It's a huge amount of money, and school people still have the capacity to be, complaining a little bit. But the reason why is because the overwhelming majority, almost all of the money that goes into this budget proposal that the governor has is for specific kinds of things, either one-time or restricted money. There's almost nothing other than that COLA amount that goes into the base, and nothing beyond that in terms of the base. Meanwhile, we've got all kinds of other expenses. Legislators are really starting to resonate around this issue. They're starting to get our point. Assembly member Al Marzouchi is carrying his AB 1614, which is the legislation that would in fact raise the base of LCFF in a really meaningful way. We sent out a communication that was authored by Kirsten Vital to every school district in the state and said, join us. It's the best club to belong to. There are no dues and there are no meetings, but it's rallying around an imperative that we all believe in. So it's like the perfect characteristics of something that we're really hoping the school districts will glob onto. So anyways, we're happy to have you guys. And if anybody needs that, we can be in touch. And then we'll also have a link to how you sign up on this week's broadcast. So I want to get that in.
Thanks, Kevin. Hopefully that includes a button for everybody who's getting on board. Okay, good.
Everybody gets a button.
Well, great, and thanks for clearing that up. And we wish that effort all the best momentum in moving forward and supporting our schools. Nice to know that coalition, there's so much support for it. So thanks for clearing that up.
You bet.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot on this show as well about stimulus funding and connecting rural America. One nice thing is, we saw in the most recent stimulus, actually there was a chunk that was set up just for broadband to reach America. It was about $65 billion to connect rural America and connect all Americans. About 42 billion is shovels in the dirt to run cables out to places it doesn't exist right now. 14 billion extends an important connectivity fund, which is actually the emergency broadband benefit, I should say. I don't want to get those confused. Emergency broadband benefit, which gives low-income families $50 a month for high-speed internet access. And that very likely could have impacted some of the families in your community getting internet connectivity to the home. Also, another $3 billion is set aside to eliminate digital redlining, which is internet service providers that might be avoiding low-income areas in maybe an urban area. So not only rural, but also urban's being addressed here. Nice to know that that's actually going to start taking place. The efforts there are going to start taking place in May. So we'll see some grants being given out, some work being done, and I'm excited about that. One thing that's noticeably missing though lately, John, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is the Emergency Connectivity Fund. I want to say, I think California was the biggest consumer of these funds. They were administered through ERate, and they helped our school districts buy devices and connectivity for our students. That is wonderful, but if you signed up for 12 months of internet, as you mentioned, you could be in some trouble. So maybe explain to us, have you heard anything about the Emergency Connectivity Fund extension, like the EBB that we just mentioned, and any implications that you see that could come from that?
Yeah, so, first of all, just to set the stage, this all sits in the category of, okay, how do we make sure students can get online when they're away from school? And you mentioned the EBB, which is a consumer program. So, so understanding, okay, who in our community has that? And if they've got a connection at home, that's great. Now, those that don't, we have this program called the Emergency Connectivity Fund, ECF. And as you said, California was actually one of the big winners, over $650 million in support already committed to California schools to get internet connections and laptop computers into the hands of students that otherwise lack that. Laptops are one thing. You give it to someone and it may work hopefully for 3 or 4 or even 5 years. Internet access, though, it's like electricity, it's like running water. You don't really store it. You pay for it on a monthly basis. And many school districts were fortunate to get funding for these ECF programs, go out, get 12 months of Wi-Fi connectivity for a device. But now that 12-month period is going to end at some point in the not too distant future. And then what do? And this is a real challenge because you either, your options are you just stop it, and which is a very difficult conversation to have. Hey, yeah, we were providing that. Sorry, we don't provide that anymore. It's difficult for the students, difficult for the teachers. And so you could just take it back, or maybe find another funding source out of an operating budget, but then that raises all sorts of other issues and challenges. We had hoped that there would be a permanent version of this emergency connectivity fund. At this point, that's not on the table for the reasons we talked about earlier. No big decisions really at the FCC right now. There are some funds left in the bank. So there was about $7 billion set aside for this emergency connectivity fund. About 6 billion of that is already accounted for. So we are expecting that there will be another additional filing window sometime later this year. It could be late this spring, could be in the summer or fall. We're not really sure yet. There is a good chance, though, that there will be another window to request additional funding for at least a few extra months of internet access. So it will buy some time to sort of a bridge to some sort of permanent, hopefully a permanent program, or finding a permanent source somewhere else to keep those connections. Because again, once you've sort of set that expectation, it's very hard to walk back from that. But that date has not yet been set. But I assume that at some point in the not too distant future, there will be discussions about a third window. So there were 2 windows last year. There'll be discussions about an additional or a third ECF window, and that is for internet access or for laptop computers for students that otherwise lack it. Those funds, though, because they are there's less funding available, $1 billion. It's weird, but that's a small number. Those funds will most likely be targeted at the highest discount rate, or the schools that qualify for the highest E-rate discount rate, those that serve the most impoverished communities. So it'll be targeted more towards the low income school districts.
Well, thanks for that, John, and for clearing that up. And it's one of those things that we talk about on the show. Using one-time funding for ongoing services has its challenges. If you're going to do some advocacy work, you're going to ask for some support on the E-rate reform. That might be something that you could ask for as well. Extension of that ECF, because if you did buy devices and connectivity with it, and you're going to run out of funding in that case, again, you're going to have to work with your general funds or find another way to keep that going with your local budgets. So definitely worth asking for some support on.
Well, and now is the time for those conversations. A silver lining of COVID is the fact that there is greater awareness in Sacramento or Washington, D.C., like, oh, hey, not everybody has internet access. We need to make sure that they have a connection. And so it is, while that memory is still fresh, I think it's really time to make that ask to go and request those funds, because another year or two and memories are short, unfortunately, and now is the time to ask for it.
Well, thank you again, John, for clearing that up. And, I've just moved to our final topic today, which is the Senate basically just passed a cybersecurity bill, which is the Strengthening America's Cybersecurity Act. This was a bipartisan bill passed unanimously through the Senate. It's moving on to the House. This is a reaction to the issues that are going on in Ukraine, expecting to have some retaliation from Russia with hacking. And, the bill itself is really for federal systems like water and electric grids to make sure they're secure in case there's a cybersecurity attack, that we can keep those services running. I want to note that I'm glad to see more legislation going on in DC about cybersecurity. However, I'm a little concerned because I don't see any funds or any methods for schools to address these issues. And we know schools are some of the most attacked entities out there. So it's a little bit concerning to me. And I know, John, again, that you do wonderful work back in DC. You've been asking for this since the beginning of the pandemic, is to have ERate help support school districts by funding cybersecurity efforts. Seems like something that's possible. Seems like it might be the right time to ask. But John, can you talk a little bit about how you see ERate being able to help with that?
First of all, it makes great sense to support cybersecurity in schools. They are, sort of just a big target sitting out there in our communities. And, one of the challenges with cybersecurity is it just takes one weak point, and so you really have to look at the whole system and support the whole system. And schools are one of those areas that really need to be shored up. Good security is expensive, but we all, it's a really good investment if you have those secure networks and they're accessible, reliable, and so on. The ERate program, because it already provides support for networks, it makes complete sense to include the security for those networks, because really that is now part of providing a network. In the old days, we could just think about a physical connection and say, okay, that's all that's necessary to provide that connectivity. It's no longer that way. You've got to have security associated with that network. And so it's a staple, it's a requirement for any network. And the ERate program's purpose is to support the critical infrastructure necessary to deliver internet access to students and library patrons. And now I would say cybersecurity is a critical infrastructure. It's not an extra. It's not sort of a nice extra, like maybe we could do it, maybe we don't. That's just not where we're at. Unfortunately, we're back to that FCC, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat commissioners, not a lot of new things taking place. And this falls into that category. They could, in a very short time frame, add cybersecurity to the ERate program, but up to this point, they are refusing to do so. And I believe a big factor in that is this 2-2 commission that's just sort of gridlocked, and it's having a real impact because it's not optional. You got to find the money, you got to somehow secure these networks, and this is becoming an issue for school districts, and it's not going to get easier. It's not going to get cheaper. It's not going to get easier. And when we have a very well run program like the ERate, that we all know the forms, the deadlines, there's officials in every school district in California and elsewhere that know how to do this stuff, allow them to use their ERate discounts for cybersecurity and secure their networks. And it would be a great benefit for all of us if that were the case.
Well, agreed, John, and thank you so much for elaborating on that and all the work that you're doing to help support those efforts to get that cybersecurity added to ERate in general. So with that, that's what we had planned for the show. Kevin, I don't know if you have any final comments before we wrap up this one.
No, it's great to be back on again, and we're looking forward to doing these on a regular basis. Tim, thanks for doing a great job, and John, it's always great to have you on.
Absolutely. Yeah. John, thank you so much for taking your time. And again, for the efforts that you're putting forth in DC. Please let us know if there's any way we can help you in those efforts. We will put out the petition link and the link to the Funds for Learning ERate news site. And if you're interested at all, it's a great place to get more information on these things. So thank you so much, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks when we do our next episode. And hang in there. We'll talk to you soon.
So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.